Hello, I'm Penelope Maver, and welcome back to the Earth Converse podcast, where we explore our relationship and conversations with the Earth, all in the hope of inspiring a deeper connection with ourselves, each other, and the Earth that is our home. And today I have Jean-Claude Pierre here, and it means so much to me, him being here, because he is a leader in the chemical industry. And he is somebody, when I think of an enlightened executive and so much hope in the corporate and organizational world that we will go in the right direction, is because of people like him. And we met in the Lakes District. He had just become CEO of a chemical company, and he had, I mean, to be fair, the team was a little bit dysfunctional when you took them over, wasn't it? Lovely individuals, but needed time together. And Jean-Claude, JC, I'll call him, really recognized this. And we had this moment up in the mountains, and there was this challenge of lowering somebody down and an abseiling. And it was like, who's volunteering? And JC just said, I'll do it. And so here he is lying like a corpse, and just letting this new team, and he didn't know anybody really. And you just it was such a beautiful role modeling of trust and how you wanted that team to turn up. I can just visualize it. It was really beautiful. And then we've stayed connected. And yeah, he's my enlightened executive role model. And so welcome. Bonjour.
Bonjour, thank you, Penelope. I'm touched by your words and humbled by them.
Mm.
It's, yeah, I'm impressed by what impact I got on you. And,
Mm.
but also, as you said, we stayed connected because you impressed me as well.
Mm.
And I really enjoyed your presence when we were working together. That's for me, would describe yourself being present in the moment
Mm.
and really able to listen to the what was going on around us and help help us kind of reflect on that and help us be present ourselves. And that's a wonderful gift.
Thank you. To start, I might go, you've had a big life, and you're multilingual, you've got such a wealth of experience, but we're going to sort of compact your big life down into, so shall we start at like your earliest memory of being connected with nature?
I was born in a small town of 10,000 people, so the countryside was part of my life, if you wish. And my first memories were are probably about the walks I had with my parents during the weekends, and more specifically, actually, the walks. My family always had a dog, and the kind of the image which comes to me when you ask me this question is the joy of the dog in the nature,
Mm.
and seeing the dog enjoying his walk made me joyful. And so that was this very joyful moment. Uh, that's the first memory which come to mind
It's
when you
lovely.
ask me about these first memories of my connection with nature. That's really what comes to mind.
It's actually quite visual, and I think so many of us could connect with that. It's so contagious, a dog's joy, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And as I'm kind of talking, and another, so that's an image, as you said,
Mm.
and there's also a smell. And for me, the smell is the damp forest. We were living in the middle of France, and so it's a kind of a continental weather, and but with relatively humid autumns. And I love autumns. I love the colors and the smell actually,
Yeah.
and the smell of a forest after the rain or after at the beginning of the day, after the night, is just what comes to mind. And it's, I don't know, there's so many. It's like um, water is exacerbating flavors for me.
Wow.
It's kind of
Yeah.
an explosion of smells,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's really what comes to me also as a memory is this smell, this smell.
Does it evoke any emotion in you apart from just that sort of the the physicalness of it?
Uh, Relaxation.
Mm,
That's really I wouldn't say maybe yeah, kind of a meditative
mm,
mind.
mm.
Just and calm and yeah, relaxation. That's really
Yeah.
what yeah, the feeling I have as I'm thinking about these moments.
Yeah, yeah, you can probably even feel it in your body
Yeah, yeah,
as you recall that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
I do think in many respect, it is so much of this connecting, reconnecting, isn't it, of with nature, of those smells, of those sights, of those experiences is yeah.
yeah. There's another image which comes to my mind is over kind of walks where more in the south of France, kind of for vacation where we were going every year at the same place, more or less. And it was on some plateau, and you had fossils, and you could really see fossils, and that's where you start to think about the interconnectedness of things. I say, well, there was water here before, and so you think about the evolution and yeah, the connection that the earth and the ocean are all one somewhere. And the beauty of these fossils was just mind-blowing. And that was for me another key moment of my childhood. Probably one of the seeds which started to make me, think in a more system way, probably.
Yeah,
When you think about it, yeah,
I'm sure it did.
yeah, yeah.
So continue, yeah. How was that in terms of your sustainability, regenerative systems thinking mindset? Where was in terms of really consolidating that going, or this is what I believe in, or was there a moment where you just go, yeah, the world needs.
Well, actually, it was an encounter. Um, but really, the person who made me reflect and conceptualize a number of things is Karl-Henrik Robèrt, the
Mm.
founder of The Natural Step. I happened to attend one of his lectures, and he was actually invited by the company I was working with, which was a Swedish company, and he's Swedish. And he really blew my mind.
Mm.
And the four principles of the natural steps and resonated so much in me that I say, wow, now I think I'm kind of connecting the dots here. He's helping me connect the dots of things I was kind of feeling, but not necessarily acting upon in my business life. And I said, wow, yes, that's amazing. And it was only in 2000, probably 2007, 2008. So it's not such a long time ago, actually, where I really realized that there was something that I could contribute to, and I could implement. I could really, I could see a path, and I could also feel that I had a responsibility to do something. Especially as you said, in the chemical industry, we are part of a problem, but I believe we are part of a solution as well.
Mm.
So that's really what blew my mind. And after that session, I went back to China. I was in China at the time, and I said, well, we need to do something. And I really, what I started to look at my business from an environmental sustainable point of view. And what I discovered is that it could generate a lot of new ideas. And that has become my motto, that I think we underestimate the power of thinking from a sustainability perspective when we look at things. And that generates new ideas to innovate and to find solutions. If we keep thinking from the same perspective, we get stuck and we don't see the solution. But if we start to look at it from a different lens and the sustainability lens, we create a virtuous circle here. Because I always say that to innovate, you need to create. And if you want to create, you need to look at things from a different perspective. And once you start doing that, then you start to be more creative, and then you start to innovate. And then you create this virtuous circle. So that's really, this kind of thinking that was triggered by this lecture. And I look at my business, and at the time I was selling coatings, so type of chemicals, to decorate consumer electronics, so mobile phones, computers, and that kind of stuff. And due to the specifications which we needed to follow, we needed to use a certain type of product. And this product was sprayed by a certain technique, but 60% was not touching the surface. It was just wasted because of the size of the things we were decorating. And I said, this is crazy. We are wasting 60% of material that we're extracting from Earth and which goes to waste. So not only, okay, the consumer is paying for that, and actually everybody was happy, say, okay, the more they waste, the more we sell. They say, this is nonsense. We are just killing ourselves with all the impacts. And at the time, 2008, it was, I would say, still early stage. We were not talking about environmental impact as we do today. The awareness of our people, of our internally, and our customers, which far less, even more so in China at the time. But I say, this is crazy. We need to change the model. And looking at that business model from that perspective, we ended up finding a solution where we had 100% transfer of the product we were selling to the final part that the customer was decorating.
Wow.
And when doing that, we actually discovered that we could change our position in the value chain and go up the value chain where we could generate more money. So it was not only virtuous from an environmental perspective, but it was also from an economical perspective,
Right.
which I think is very, very true of many, many situations. It was not a one-off. I mean, I have other examples. And that's really triggered, and we started to engage in different conversations also with the customers, who started to realize that we could offer a very attractive value proposition. And so, talking about the virtuous circle, I saw the power of it straight from in my hands, I would say, and convinced me that this was the way to go in any kind of business. There was probably a solution of some kind that was possible by thinking from that lens.
What a great example. I would love to, yeah, let's drill down there and into that example. I've got some questions around that. First, it sounds interesting about like the conceptualization of the 4-step helped you put together what you already felt and thought. It's a lovely, that's the value, isn't it, of somebody actually sort of articulating and putting a model around it. What are the 4 steps?
So the 4 steps, I think I have them somewhere down because I have them in mind, but I want to have to be precise with you. I have always one close by me, but it's that it says that in a sustainable society, nature is not subject to systematically increasing the concentration of substances extracted from earth crust, like minerals, like fuel, that it is not subject to systematically increasing the concentration of man-made substances, like chemicals, and is not also systematically subject to the degradation of by physical means, so like deforestation or drainage of groundwater. So So these three are nature related, and the fourth one is people related. And it's about not systematically having hurdles for people to bring meaning to their life, to have access to competencies, to have access to healthcare. And I think there is also the notion of impartiality and influence. So these are five. So, these ones came after the fact.
Yeah.
So Karl-Henrik Robèrt, he was, or is an oncologist, and he was very much concerned about what was happening to nature. And he made an analogy between nature and the patient in an hospital. And he said, well, for me, nature is critically ill. And he was talking that like this 30 years ago, right? More than 30 years ago. And he said, well, what do we do when we have a critical patient in hospital? We bring all the experts from different competencies, and they look at the patient from their lens, and they say what they think from their lens. And once you start having the different views, you start exchanging, and you come up with a better solution. And what he did, he started to write a number of things about what he was thinking should be done to protect nature. And he sent that across the globe to a number of scientists. And he collected the views of his experts. And after many iterations, he came up with his originally three principles that you cannot deny. Yeah. These are absolutely, obvious things that you need to know. And this is really, you were talking about drilling my experience. He was kind of drilling down to the essence, what needs to be done. And these are the three principles. And then he developed certain tools also to help, and which actually I used at a later stage with another company where we met, and developing a complete sustainability roadmap for the company. But that's really these principles are universal.
Right.
And the question is how you go about it. And that's, but it's more about as you said, the willingness as a leader to engage the organization on that path, rather than, specific competencies or whatever. It's just having the guts and the conviction it's the right thing to do, and that there is a solution, even if you don't have it when you start.
Yeah, that faith in that and that potential. And so how did you go, you went back to China with this good idea and sort of like things need to change. So where did you, how did you get that engagement? How did you get into that buy-in? And I'm also interested about unleashing, that particular issue, and was somebody actually further in the organization already identified it but hadn't articulated it? Or just tell us about sort of getting that thing happening.
So actually it's an interesting question, because I was back in China, and the image we have in China on China is that Chinese have destroyed their nature with the economic growth. And you can see a lot of pollution of the ground, of the water. But in their philosophy, they have something which is called Taoism. And long story short, but I have, so probably I've done a PhD and I have studied Taoism. I don't know, it blew my mind. And I make here a quick connection with Claire Graves, the American psychologist, was developed. He was asking himself for his entire career, what is the definition of a mature, healthy adult? And he developed different stages of consciousness. And when you look at Taoism, it is for me the highest level of consciousness. And you can argue how come they were thinking that way 2,500 years ago, because the life conditions to prompt this kind of thinking wasn't there, but and so on and so on. But we maybe not go there. But I was blown up by by this way of thinking. And I think in the DNA of Chinese people, there is this philosophy. They have this Confucianism, but they have the Taoism. And somehow, when you speak about environment, even if they have made bad things, they have this consciousness somewhere. So it's probably when I went back to your question and explained that we could not continue like this, it somehow resonated deep inside with what exists in the Chinese, in consciousness. And that was relatively easy, actually, to embark 2 or 3 people and say, yes, we need to do something different. And in particular, there was my technical person, and we say, you know what, the fundamental problem is this waste. So what could we find as a solution to have 100% transfer, to get rid of this waste? And China being the manufacturing hub of the world, and being in south of China, which is the center of this hub, where you can find within 100 square kilometers, every technology, every manufacturing value chain you can think of. We started even to go to a market and say, let's look at what are other people using to decorate things. This basic idea. And we found that actually people decorating T-shirts were using 3D printing technology. And we found that the people who are decorating ceramics, which is there's a big one in Foshan, they are using printers of a special kind. And then we found that the head of the printers could use not only ink, but the polymers we were using. And then we went to see a guy who were making printing machines. And then we bought a printing machine that we put in a garage. We rented a garage. It was literally a garage. And we started to make some experiments. And long story short, and then it worked. And then we went to big OEMs, which I will not mention, but by name, but where we say, okay, we were able to give you that. Could you even consider doing things by yourself? So going up the value chain. And that's how the whole thing started. It's by trial and error, but really going back and reflect, what are others doing actually that could inspire us?
Great example. And I love this in terms of, tell us about, because this is incredible. So you're leading this huge organization and you're doing your PhD in sustainability and Chinese wisdom. I mean, this is amazing.
That's it was not planned. It was just a book which blew my mind also at some point was Synchronicity. And because I am an engineer by background, I did a lot of strategy. I was about to join the strategy department of the largest chemical industry, a chemical company, because of the way I was thinking. So I'm somebody extremely structured, who is thinking many years ahead. And then I read Synchronicity, and that helped me put a lot of things in perspective.
It's a wonderful book. I remember reading.
And so, yes, when I have, I don't know, I was working with a Chinese person. I was working with a Chinese consultant, actually, because when I arrived in China, I was, so disconnected from the culture that I felt I had made the biggest mistake in my life, because I could not connect my very structured 10 years thinking ahead in China, where it's tomorrow morning, and it didn't work. So, and you learn by experience that when something goes wrong, the first person to consider to change is you. So I said, okay, what do I need to change to adapt and to understand and to find a middle ground where we can work together? And this person at some point said, you should really do a PhD and think about your experience and so on. And I said, I don't see the benefit of that, to be honest. And then I started to reflect and I say, yeah, actually, there is maybe I want to go deeper in certain things. And I was not planning to study ancient Chinese wisdom, But when I started to look at I look at trust. There was a notion of trust to start with, and what blew my mind was that a younger generation of well-educated Chinese were totally lost with the value system, and the notion of trust was very hard to establish even among Chinese. And so I said, what's going on here? And I started to look at what is influencing the value system of Chinese today. So I had no other choice than looking at all the ancient Chinese wisdom and say what they brought to them and how they were assimilated or not assimilated, to come to the conclusion actually that very often we have the impression that Chinese people have lost their values. And actually they have not lost their values from my perspective, but there is a collision of values. And there is a problem of hierarchy of values somehow, because there has not been, there is no inventory, I would say, of things which might be more important than others. And so you have a Confucianism, Moism, Maoism, legalism, Taoism. And you know, even the Chinese government today will never say that certain things under Mao were not maybe the best things to do. They will never say that. And so there's a lot of confusion of what should be, you know, some kind of guidelines in terms of values, which would make the society more robust and maybe more sustainable. There is none of that. And so there is a complete collision, but they have all these values in themselves. So back to your question, when I came back and I started to talk about nature protecting the environment, it resonated with the Taoist part, I would say, which is in them.
Because I think it is actually a human innate thing that but we need the courage or the somebody to go, look, you know, to reconnect with that part of ourselves that knows that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key which worked and unconsciously that I used but worked was probably this Taoist kind of legacy. But we all have this kind of legacy somewhere. So, but which is maybe expressed in different ways, or it's coming from different sources. So it's going back maybe to the source, try to reignite, as you said, to this this connection with nature that we all have. I think there is actually a great. Unfortunately, I think they have terminated their activities in the form they used to have. It was the Association of Conservation of I forget the name now, but it's I met this guy because I ended up attending the third International Taoist Forum, where I made a talk about ecology and Taoism and connecting with Claire Gray philosophy. And I met the guy who started this association, and he had come to the conclusion that actually, in order to do a bit what you were just describing, one lever was to re-engage religions with the connections with nature. Yes. Because if you look at all the religions around the globe, they are all connected with nature, but they don't necessarily emphasize that element when they are doing the preach, whatever is the term appropriate for every religion. So he had connected with all the religions around the globe and say, okay, if you look at the number of people who are practicing a certain religion, you can impact millions of people, actually billions of people around the globe. So using in a positive terms, religions to help pass the message, reconnect to what we have inside, and regenerate this awareness that we have lost, religions could be a very good way. And so they have engaged with different religions, and they have developed a lot of programs where religions really started to reflect on the way they were communicating, let's put it this way, and re-emphasize the notion of nature in their communication. I use the term here,
Yeah.
but which is, and I thought it was a brilliant idea, and there is a lot of things going on around the globe from that initiative.
It's the source, isn't it? Nature is that source, and religion can be like the delivery system, or the, big. It both is the what am I trying to say? Yeah, it is rooted. Yeah, all religions, all spirituality, even from paganism, non-religion. It's the nature-based source, because humans have wanted to connected with nature to make sense of it. That's where the stories come from, and then the
Absolutely.
institutionalization of religion, and then yeah, this disconnect. I mean, yeah, we've been disconnected from that through
Yeah,
different
yeah,
ways of communicating.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
know that with Taoists, they are, for instance, convinced in 2000, I think it was already in 2006, convinced the Chinese government to give a piece of land to Taoists and that they would exploit in a Taoist way. And 5 years after, the biodiversity was incredibly uh, developed. So they could show that the way they are interacting with nature has a very, very positive impact. And so what does that mean? So there was there's been a case like this, but we have done that with in different ways with all the religions around the globe.
Wonderful. And that reminds me of sort of that localness and the globalness, by doing that on a local level, um, or in your own practice and in your own community, and then the knock-on effects of that.
Absolutely, I think you need to inspire. I mean, if you cannot dictate, the people need to take ownership, and you can only inspire. And there's different ways to inspire. There's not one way. So I mean, you have to. Some things work for some people. Some others work for others. I mean, depending on our culture, our experiences, and we are triggered by different things.
Yeah.
And so,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
it doesn't prevent us to. That's always always. It's very often what we hear that, and I've heard that also in companies. Some people say, why should we bother about doing more about the environment? It's more expensive, and anyway, uh, like, and they were taking the Chinese. It was in Europe. The Chinese don't do anything. So at the scale of the world, the Chinese have the biggest impact because they are the most populated country. Blah blah blah. But I say, well, if you keep thinking that way, nothing will happen. So let's start by ourselves, what we can do, and inspire. Otherwise, we are just, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that for sure nothing will happen. But there is also this mindset. And some people who are, very pragmatic, down to earth, and they say, yeah, why should we bother? But say, and then you go back to the notion of actually thinking that way is going to bring us innovation, and then actually you can even more be having an economical benefit, and so on and so forth. And but it's you have this kind of feedback when you start the conversations.
Yeah, yeah, but the engagement in that, but that's, I think, in terms of how the leader can really step into that and be and create that conversation, and
Yeah,
and open the dialogue, and see, challenge what needs to be done in terms of different ways.
yeah. So I think nowadays there's a bit more awareness because we are bombarded by all kind of messages, by through all kind of channels about and documentary about the damage we have done on nature. So there is that, but it needs still so there is an awareness. We still lack the action piece. So how do we come from awareness to action? So there is some more individual kind of actions, but even when you go shopping And that's what we do with our own bags, because we don't want to take extra bags and you buy in bulk. The people, even the shop owners are, you are looked in a different way because you are bringing your own bags that you are recycling every time. So it's, even these small actions are not yet common when they are so obvious to do, actually, and they are very, very simple. So there is an awareness, but there is this disconnect between, yes, I understand, but what kind of actions can I do? But there is certain things that you can do, and you can, I mean, I use public transports to go to work. I have a car, which I need a car, but at some point I don't need a car. So probably the next, I will not replace my car. But I use public transport, and it takes me twice the time than if I was going by car. But I don't see that as an extra time. I see that as an opportunity to reflect and to learn and to read and to observe my surrounding. So if you take that from that perspective, well, it's okay. But if you say, well, no, we're going to spend another 15 minutes and time is precious, then so it's really switching your mind and say, yeah, okay, can I think differently also?
And that sort of, individually, and how can we think systemically, differently? And so in terms of like the chemical industry, how did you get into chemistry, and why have you gone into that field? And
by laziness. Because, well, my grandfather started a small chemical company after World War II with somebody. He was captured by the Germans during the war. He met another French guy, and they came back and they said, we will open a business. And my grandfather had a chemical degree. So they started to make wax, and they used old cans where they were putting the wax, and that's how we started.
Really?
And for me, so there was a small family business, and it was for me the natural kind of step. I needed to follow the legacy and continue with my grandfather's business. It turned out differently, and I left this business. But that was really for me the obvious choice. I needed to follow the legacy.
That's beautiful. That's really meaningful.
Absolutely. And it was so, yeah, it was very obvious to me, and also very hard to leave that business.
Yeah.
And that's where also I reflected on the notion of being driven by emotions, because for me, that was really the emotional aspect which was giving me the evidence that I had to join this business, overlooking some of the facts which could have helped me take a sharper decision at some point in time. But I don't regret anything.
No.
Yeah.
But that's a lovely reflection point. And just also where it's part of, we quite often blindly go into or adopt our parents or ancestors' beliefs, and we actually don't know. We don't know what's mine. What's my story? Am I living my parents, my grandfathers, or am I living mine? And it's that point where that adult goes and then engaging. What am I driven by, emotion and obligation versus some sort of other value that's become important to you?
Yeah. And actually, once I started to be really aware of the impact we had as the chemical industry, I did not decide to leave, because I'm a strong believer that if you want to change the system you are in, you need to be part of the system. So, and as you said, having the mind I have, which is not maybe the most common in the chemical industry, I better stay and influence the system from inside, which gives me probably more credibility than being a consultant from outside and telling the chemical industry what to do. So that's really my practical sense, which comes into play here. and pragmatism, I would say, which told me, okay, I need to stay and I need to show the example by doing some things by myself to show that there is another way to think. And that is possible in the chemical industry.
Yeah. And what is that? I've got a couple of questions. So where was there a moment in where you go, oh my God, the chemical industry is creating such harm? Was there like a bit of an awakening of that? Was
I
there
think
a
it's
point?
back to this lecture,
Yeah.
and that actually there was another way.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, actually, because I think it's an interesting question. I think when you don't see the light for another way, you tend to be like the ostrich, you know. You put your head in the sand, and you don't want to see it because you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you don't see a light somewhere, because
Yeah.
it's very
Yes.
it brings
Uncomfortable.
a lot of anxiety somewhere.
Sure. And your life's work, and it's like, who am I? What am I? What, yeah.
Exactly.
Quite
But
existential.
once I started to see some kind of light, I started to be more honest with myself, saying, yeah, actually, I'm creating a problem. But I could see that there is probably a solution. And so I started to be even more true to myself and say, yes, I'm creating a real problem.
I love that, JC. And that's the thing, isn't it? That going into the shadow and then you only see the shadow, it's only the light is possible. It's that dance, or, that is the, yeah, I don't know, outrage and optimism, or that is that is the challenge and that's the opportunity. This is the paradox, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's. I mean, you had a great question because you make me think that probably this was this notion that because I could not see light, I could not be true enough to myself that I was really creating a problem because I wanted to avoid to be, which I think is relatively human somewhere. Uh, so yeah, that's I think the triggering moment was having this lecture from Karl-Henrik that was giving me some kind of path.
Mm. And something led you to that. There's something little synchronicity sort of thing that sort of goes, you found that. And in fact, I'm thinking he's the same. He founded Masters in Sustainability. Was it Blecking
Correct.
Institute?
Yes, correct.
Because Luigi, I interviewed Luigi. So he did his, I'm just thinking, because I thought, God, that name sounds familiar. Yeah. So what is the hope for the chemical industry?
There's different challenges. One of the challenges of the chemical industry is that we are very dependent on the oil industry because oil is the raw material for so many of our products. So one critical element is how do we get rid of this fundamental raw material, which is necessary, but which is certainly a challenge. And it is a challenge in the sense that we should not displace the problem.
Yeah.
We have a problem with the oil, but if we make bio-based products from crops which are using arable land for
Yeah.
making crops for food, then this is the wrong answer.
Yeah.
So
Well,
we
the
need to be
chemicals.
smart. And I think it's for me more interesting to think about the usage of waste, the usage of recyclable material, and more circular economy, which is a challenge in some areas because you have first of all, you need to think about from a value chain perspective, which the people are not used to. So you need to embark all the actors of the value chain. And these people are not normally talking to each other. So this is a challenge by itself because it's a new paradigm of working. There's the notion of collaboration, of open innovation. So you need to be more, yes, open and share and co-create together, which is these are new kind of things for many people. So that takes time. There is also this the economic aspect of it, because it can look very nice to recycle things, but when you look at the cost of doing things, there is also limitation which is acceptable from a consumer perspective, because there is also this element. If you destroy the business, okay, it's maybe one way to have less impact on the environment, but it's you need to find the right balance. So there is this element, and sometimes also when you look at the energy required to recycle, actually you are consuming more energy than using your previous solution. So this is all these elements which are not simple elements to measure, to analyze. So this is one key element, is to how do we get rid of this oil raw material. And the second element, which is not necessarily connected, is what do we do with the end of life of the products we contribute to make with our chemicals? Because very often they are very durable. And if you take chemicals which goes in plastics, and plastics is everywhere, they can bring a lot of good things. And so I'm not against plastic 100%, but how do you can recycle them? And sometimes it's not easy to recycle because the energy required, as I mentioned, or because they are not, the life expectancy is very, very long, and they are not biodegradable. So how can you make these products more biodegradable, and that they have to biodegrade in elements which are not harmful for the earth, which is another challenge. So that's not simple, but I think there is an awareness and a willingness from the chemical industry of being a key player now in that movement. And there is, I think, I have never seen in the last 5 years, I would say, I've never seen so much research in the chemical area for more environmentally friendly solutions. And what is interesting is also that the people start to realize that when you start to bring more bio-based products, you can develop characteristics of material that you could not reach with the conventional products we have. So you can have actually characteristics, more resistance to UV lights, to these kind of things, or more mechanical properties, which makes the product you make also more durable. So they are discovering that actually it can bring also something from the pure technical aspect of the parts that they contribute to make. And that's sometimes a value proposition which is easier to use and to sell to your customer than it is more environmentally friendly. Because today it's still not something which is an appealing driver for many applications. It is, the closer you are to the consumer, the more appealing it is, because there is a pressure from the consumer requiring more environmentally friendly products. But when you are further away from that pressure, there's a number of elements which are used in products which are not necessarily complying with this pressure.
Yeah, the closeness of that. I'm sort of so if you sit in that, I mean, what does that feel like as a leader?
I think, as we were discussing a bit before, it's a question of conviction. You need to be convinced that you need to do something because you are part of a problem, and that you can be part of the solution. So it's really not losing your thread and your conviction. And it's about also thinking in a different way. So if I give you an example, when you have, very often what you hear is that, well, okay, we could do something, but our customers are not interested and they will not pay more. Okay, but maybe we have the wrong customers. Or maybe we're in the wrong market. So I give you an example where we wanted to develop a more bio-based product using waste, and nobody would buy that in our customer base. And so reflecting on where is the highest pressure, it's where customers are closer to consumers, let's go and talk to somebody who is closer to the consumer because he might hear us better. And guess what? There was a very quick connection here. And this person also had a direct influence how to position a more bio-based products in the marketplace, having a different value proposition because he was the one putting the end product on the market. And long story short, but we made an agreement. And so I went to see the CEO and I said, okay, this is the idea. Are you in? And it's going to be more expensive. Are you in? Can we share the cost? And it was too expensive. So we engaged the supplier and the supplier of the supplier, which was an energy supplier, which energy was a key contributor of the cost of one of our raw material we're buying. And aligning people who had the same desire to contribute better to the environment, thinking about along the value chain, finding the people who had this pressure from the consumer. And so we ended up selling at a customer that we were not selling to, that was not necessarily a market segment we wanted to go into, but that we could see as the early point to start developing a technology that we could then roll out. We could generate enough volume, we could reduce the cost of this raw material, and then we started to be able to be competitive to sell in other markets. But it's really about thinking that way, that there is a solution somewhere. It's if we always use the example, if we don't find a solution, it's that because we keep thinking the same way.
Yeah.
So but you need to keep this this conviction and this search, this curiosity, and that can be tiring, and that can be sometimes depressing if you see that others give up. But the good thing is that there is more and more of these people.
That's the thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. They have found really a number of passionate people at customers, at suppliers, and also within our companies with the younger generation, which, I mean, for them, it's becomes even more obvious that, yeah, you need to do something. There's no way around. It's the way to go. And so they will find this passion and this conviction and this keep the flame when times are down.
For sure, and yeah, keeping that trust, and I think it goes back to your Chinese example in China. Getting the technician and getting the 3 or 4 people. It's sort of creating that momentum, isn't it? The tribe, and also I love the idea of questions and curiosity, and it's also you're under pressure of your shareholders, but that is where the curiosity and not being trapped by a segment, or this is why we've done things. I love the question. Lorraine Smith, who I interviewed, and have you come across her work? An advisor on regenerative futures and things like that. And she'll go, what is the question is, how are you serving life?
That's a very good question.
And that's the questions. It's not about, what we can dig out of the ground or what we need for, but how are we serving life? And she goes, even like, she used the example, I don't want to know if you treat your staff better or you don't pollute, that's bare minimum. It's like, how are you serving life? And and I think that we are motivated by that question.
Yeah, and I think it resonates with everybody.
Yeah. And it elevates, doesn't it? It elevates everybody because we all want that. And so it's really tapping into a human need. And
absolutely. For me, I was having the question is, what is life, what life is about? But this question is much more powerful because it's easier to connect. I think I love this question.
Yeah, isn't it great?
And you adapt it.
Yeah, great. Take it. And it's a serving, where we are wanting to serve life. And I also I'm thinking about green chemistry and the wonderful design into regenerative cultures of Daniel Val. And so he's got a few questions here, like about green chemistry and material science, silence, green chemistry and material science. And studying, there's a quote from Paul Anastas, interviewed by Josh Wolf. Studying and copying nature is one of the greatest tools in the green chemistry toolbox. And he goes, there's some questions that we invite chemists to ask. How can we create chemical synthesis methods that maximize the incorporation of all materials used in the process into the final product? How can we redesign chemical products to preserve efficacy or function while reducing toxicity? How can we favor raw material feedstock that is renewable rather than depleting whenever technically and economically practical? Blah, blah, blah. Well, not blah, 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 but, big question.
These are all the questions that we have to ask ourselves. And the notion of biomimicry is absolutely powerful. I'm working now with somebody who is part of the Biomimicry Institute in France. And it's amazing watching at nature, the gecko. And if you are thinking about glue, our gecko has such a powerful and switch on, switch off type of adhesive. And how does it do that? Because I think when you think about adhesive, which is fantastic to bond things together and give strength and so on, but one of the issues is how do you disassemble when you think about end of life? So can you have an adhesive that you can switch on and off? And under which circumstances? These are the things, and nature has so many wonderful examples to teach us and to reflect upon.
And speaking of reflect, I haven't read it yet, but you released, and you were so humble because I didn't really know this, 25th of November, 2020, developing a sustainable employee-owned chemical company.
Yeah, that was part of my reflection time. I was invited to write an article in the handbook of system thinking, because I did my PhD in organizational system, and system thinking was really at the heart of this training, I would say. And it was really for me a good reflection of what we did in the company where we met, and trying to explain what I went through, and using the 12 levels of Tonel Amido in terms of how do you change a system, at which level do you consider intervening in the system, what are the archetypes that you can use also, and so that has been influencing my way of thinking to say, okay, what should I do to start the sustainability journey at Scott Bader, which is the name of the company. And that's really, and it's, for me, it's very important. And you were mentioning the PhD. I didn't necessarily wanted to do a PhD at start, but what I learned through the PhD is it gives you the time and the ability to reflect on things. And I think there is a lack of bridges between business and academia. And I think doing this PhD for me was kind of contributing to making that bridge. There's a lot of great thinking in academia which doesn't find its way to business because people consider that as too conceptual, but as Einstein was saying, there's nothing more practical than a good theory. And I so believe that, so we don't, I think, in business, take enough time to reflect. That's the biggest shortfall we have in business. And can we nourish ourselves from people who spend a lot of time to think, which are academics? And sometimes they might be thinking in the vacuum, but it's not necessarily uninteresting. It might not be useful today, but it might trigger also another perspective, which can bring something else, which can become practical. But there is a lack of bridge, and I think, to
reimagine, to spend time reflecting, what will it take for business to stop and reflect and reimagine, and you need that pause. And
Yeah, yeah. And
yeah,
in which context do you do that as well? Because I think for me, what I learned over the years is that my best reflection time is when I am in nature, inspired, not disturbed by external elements of a daily life. I don't know, but this is I need to walk in nature. And so when I am stuck in something, I just got out of my office and I go for a walk. And I'm lucky that I have always been somewhere not so far from the countryside. But I need to be in the country. If I walk in the street, it has zero impact. I need to be in the forest. I need to be
absolutely.
around some nature or flowers or whatever. And that's where I free up my mind. I start to have clarity. It's kind of a filter, kind of, and that clarifies things for me. And I have been experiencing that with a friend of mine, where actually we have turned around a business where all the thinking, all the key decisions we took through walks.
But this is so fundamental. And I think just recognizing that, because how many decisions are made in four walls around a table? It goes back to that connection. You don't feel connected with the true customer or the true
Exactly,
source, which is nature,
exactly.
so the more that we can be in it and amongst it and feel, I think it operates at so many different levels where, sort of energetically, um, kind of our ancestors are around us. Yeah,
Absolutely,
mites,
absolutely.
the smells and sights, and yeah, circling back there. But this is, and I think that, yeah, I do think if more leaders and organizations did that, and
Yeah, so home office it's not the best setup to have this kind of experience. So I think there is a mix. We need to have home office, and we need to have also face to face, and also to have this kind of conversation uh, in the right context, also
yeah,
in the right context.
yeah,
I know there's a lot of people proposing now to have this kind of leadership, or not leadership, but experiences of working as a team in nature, and to really reconnect with what matters,
yeah.
and come up to more profound and more important decision rather than urgent decision.
Mm, mm, mm,
And I think it's absolutely fundamental, absolutely fundamental.
mm. It's the only thing that will change the direction,
Yeah,
and help us see
yeah, yeah,
clearly. We can't see
yeah,
clearly if we're firefighting.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think there is another element that you mentioned before, and say being under the pressure of the shareholders and everything. There is for me another fundamental piece to the puzzle, is to from the financial side,
Mm,
to bring into the balance sheet the externalities that we generate, so that the cost of that we bring to nature has to be incorporated in the financial models.
mm.
And I know there's a lot of work going on, and it's very exciting to see that things are moving. There's also a lot of lip service somewhere, so we need to be very careful, because greenwashing is part of, unfortunately, of the journey. But I think there is some genuine intentions or initiatives to bring these externalities and say, okay, this has a cost. Actually, this is part of the cost. You cannot neglect them. And once the people will be judged financially also on these elements, that will change fundamentally the story. But I think it's not for tomorrow morning.
Yeah, yeah, but that's where that's where it hurts us. So we do change, unfortunately, isn't it? That is the mechanism we respond to, and if we don't, I mean, we don't measure what we can't see or what we can't, imagine, and we're so
Yep.
obsessed with measuring. So let's use that measuring for no, I don't know, what is it, like, what am I trying to say? if the system requires us to measure, let's measure as many externalities as we can that creates the pain, that creates the shift.
Yeah.
We need
I
the
think we need a
mindset
bit
shift.
of a carrot and the stick.
Yeah.
So the carrot is the positive aspect and everything, and reconnecting with, and the stick, unfortunately, is probably part of the toolbox somewhere. Because as you said, some, and certain, depending on the circumstances, even what I found extremely difficult is, even if you are convinced as an individual, if you are in a system which doesn't prompt you to be acting according to what you believe, you end up being acting as like the system wants you to do.
So true.
And that's terrible. And that's why we have all these, it can go to burnout, it can, but all the gradation in between. But, this feeling of not doing the right thing, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, this is the reality. So staying true to yourself is extremely difficult when you have this pressure of delivering results which are driven by elements which can be not in line with what you should really be doing.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think, what is it? I always quote Charles Eisenstein, actually, but I haven't got the book. Oh no, actually, I'll just do a little pause here. What does he say? I think this is sort of what, in terms of what you're, what does he say? Oh yeah, no, he talks about, but the original feminist, so this is Charles Eisenstein, Climate, A New Story.
Yeah.
But the original feminists and racial justice radicals had a bigger vision than winning equality in the existing system. The feminists didn't want just to have equal status in the patriarchy. They wanted to transform the whole system. Civil rights leaders like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King didn't just want African American men to be treated equally in the United States military. They wanted to end militarism and imperialism together. That's the thing, isn't it? We're not just trying to be better in the system. It's actually changing the system, isn't
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, I don't know, it's also with Einstein was saying that you cannot expect that thinking the same way you're going to generate a different way of doing.
Yeah.
So you need to change the system. Buckminster Fuller was also talking about this notion of you need to make the system obsolete and you need to go to another system. And that's I make here the connection with Claire Graves, which was another person who was really impacted the way I'm thinking, this level of consciousness. And where you need to realize that you are part of a global system, and that the different pieces need to be functional, and that on the one hand you need to have people who have a desire to create new things, but they need to have a certain frame within which they can function. Having a totally deregulated system does not work.
Yeah.
So you need to, but how do you create a healthy, functional, regulated system? It has to be co-created in some way, some shape or form. So you need to have people who have hunger, but not to the extent that it is impacting others. So these are all kind of natural elements we have in us, which we need to leave an expression for, but within a certain level of boundaries, which make generate a healthy living and a healthy society and a healthy civilization. And this is having this level of consciousness that everything needs to exist, but in such a way that it has to be making the system functional. You cannot prevent certain things to happen, but they need to happen in a certain way so that they are not disturbing the system. And that requires a certain level of awareness and consciousness. And for me, back to the early part of our conversation, when I studied Taoism, I was impressed by the way they were able to think 2,500 years ago, and which is so modern in so many ways. And when you look at Claire Graves, he says that consciousness of people is generated by two things: the life conditions we live in and the way we find to address the problem of these life conditions. And
Right.
that's an evolving,
Yeah.
they use the notion of spiral, and
Yes. Yeah.
the movement of spiral dynamics has been developed from that. So it's a never-ending quest. Also, that's the name of a book
Yeah.
based on the work of Claire Graves. So that's how we evolve as humans. I spent several weeks to understand how come the Taoists could think that way 2,500 years ago. And that's where I realized that actually it's not about the existence of the life conditions by themselves. It's how we see these life conditions
Yeah.
through our own lenses. And they were able to, have enough reflection and probably reconnect to the deep inside to make sense in a different way of what they were seeing. And that's how they came up with all these Taoist principles, which are all about harmony between human and nature, and somehow also harmony between humans. And this is the very basic fundamental uh, elements that we need to function as human beings. And that's for me what life is about. It's about creating the conditions that we are one with nature, and that we are collaborating together to develop these systems.
Mm.
Uh,
Oh, I love that. It's very similar in terms of just interviewed Bill Plotkin, and he talks about 80 to 90% of adults in the Western industrial society are not so initiated in terms of really understanding their ecological niche. And so they cannot be, it's in terms of level of consciousness about not being really able to be that partner in a co-creation with nature, that actually we haven't done enough deep soul reflection and work in order to really step up into that level. And so it's very similar to what you're saying with Taoism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like also this notion of nested circle, and I know that sometimes there is people who are against that approach, but I think it has the merit of, for me, kind of clarifying things and maybe forgetting maybe some of the downside of it. But if you look at this nested circle where you have nature as the biggest circle, then you have society, and then you have business. And then I was making the analogy that you cannot have a functional business if you don't have a functional society. And I take the example of, if you take a situation, unfortunately, in some countries in the Middle East, for instance, where there is no more society, in Syria, how can you think about having a thrivable business? That's not possible.
Yeah.
On the other end, you cannot have a thriving society if you have not a thriving environment. And here I take my experience of China. When you have levels of pollution with huge amount of small particles to the point where you are asked to stay inside, then you cannot even not have a life, then the society cannot function. So it's clearly seeing this hierarchy that environment and protection environment is the fundamental element of anything else. Anything else is just dependent on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything. Yeah.
So it's not about, it's not because you're going to have a thrivable business that, okay, the society is going to be great and the environment, by the way, is going to be benefiting from it. No, it's the reverse. And so that's why I like the nested circle, for kind of conveying this kind of message
Yes. Yes.
in the business circles.
Oh, I'm so pleased you're in those circles. Bless you. Oh, doing your best work there. Really, really, JC. It means, yeah.
Trying, because sometimes,
Right, that's the thing.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What is
And
it?
you need to also take the people where they are. And
Yeah.
sometimes there's even more fundamental, I'm doing some consulting, and then sometimes more fundamental things to address before you can even consider going into that direction. But it's, how can you use the environmental lens to find the solutions to the existing problems with different solutions, because as I said before, when you think that way, it brings new ideas that you don't think about when you are in your mainstream way of thinking.
Yeah. And I do think part of that is actually helping people to reconnect with their own connection with
Absolutely.
nature, you know,
Absolutely.
or like you say, in terms of religion or whatever that it is, to
Whatever
remind
it is.
them of what they already know.
Yeah. Yeah. But it brings meaning
Yeah.
to the people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, something else that sort of remains to be said, JC.
Maybe one thing, Penelope, because when we talk about nature, reconnection with nature, the notion of sustainability, there's another, for me, fundamental element in order to move towards that direction, this higher awareness and going from awareness to action, is the notion of self-management and the notion of autonomous teams. Because I think we have come to, we spend most of our time in organizations of some kind, with structures, with processes, and in more and more complex, in a more and more complex world, interconnected, and we have, I think, lost the human aspect of these organizations, where we are bound to the processes, forgetting that there are humans behind the processes.
Yeah.
And that actually, and I know that Schumacher and was initiated the Schumacher Institute, and his book Small is Beautiful, that you cannot have an organization more than 300 people or so. I think that was his threshold. And I recently actually followed a training with the Semco Style Institute with Ricardo Zendler, and he's talking about team of 10, and that you need to think about your company in teams of 10. So if you have 300 company, 300 or 3,000, it's 30 teams of 300 teams of 10. And how do you bring the people to become autonomous? Actually, when you go through the process, you realize that the people take take ownership of not only their work, but somehow of themselves.
Yes.
What they do in their private life, because they are managing their lives, so they know how to do it. We have just conditioned them in their business life in such a way that they have lost even the capacity of using it, because they have to follow a process. When actually, and the process in a very fast changing world and complex, which is very often not appropriate and is so rigid, that the people have lost even the capacity to use their capabilities of being autonomous, which, as I said, do that in everyday life. And I think it is also related somehow, in somewhere, to nature, because it's part of a sustainability element of it's an element of sustainability. Let's put it this way. And when the people are gaining more self-confidence, are taking more ownership, they are connecting more with themselves, and somehow, as we said, nature is in us, so they are reconnected somehow with nature.
Absolutely, their true nature, isn't it? Like really reclaiming their own personal authority. And and when somebody steps into their potential, you know, the creativity and the limitlessness of that.
And the notion that they can do something about things. That they are not just bound to a process, to an authority which is decided in certain ways and cascade down. No, you have an ability to do something at your own level, and this is your freedom. But it's giving autonomy without a certain methodology, and I would say even rules, but co-created, as we discussed, is a recipe for failure, actually. And there's been a study made by in a number of places where they had decided to connect better schools, local schools, with the local communities. So they had decided to break down the fences of the yard where the kids were playing,
Oh, literally.
literally. And what they have observed is actually that once they have done that, the pupils started to play closer to the building rather than starting to
Yeah.
explore this additional freedom which was given to them. And actually, in the business, it's exactly the same. If you do give more autonomy to people, they don't necessarily use it actually. And I mean, I have a number of situations where actually they even tend to use less because they have no understanding of the new boundaries,
Yeah.
which are much more flawless, much more, yeah,
Fluid.
uh,
Yeah.
diffuse, if you wish. But so you need to give them a certain methodology of how do you use this freedom to act,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
give them this trust, this self-confidence that, and we're going to go step by step. But so that's a very interesting. You cannot just decide, okay, well, let's go and everybody can decide what he wants. And we know it can be a recipe for chaos, but even the willingness to take that freedom requires a certain approach so that the people gain the confidence. A number of them will go for it, but experience proves that most will struggle with that.
Mm. It is providing that it's sort of psychological safety, isn't it?
Mm,
Or, like in order
absolutely.
to sort of the freedom within a framework or something like that, those sort of all those different expressions and helping that somebody. I mean, you can see it in terms of when people say, oh, no, I delegated, I just let them do whatever they like. And it's like, well, how is performance? Well, not getting anything. Well, because they need, there's some sort of process or structure or,
Yeah, yeah.
dimensions that help that person step
Mm.
into that. Mm.
And then you have often the conclusion, you say, I told you, they
Yeah,
don't know how to do
yeah,
it.
and then claim back, and I'll take it back. Then it's like and the sort of like, whereas actually
Exactly. So,
creating that environment in which people can really
yeah,
step into
when
that.
actually they are totally capable, but there was something missing
Yeah,
to ignite this. And that just, and because the system before was conditioning them in such a way. So actually, the problem was not them, the
yeah,
problem was the system.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
But unfortunately, there's sometimes some shortcuts in terms of conclusions drawn of such experiences.
yeah, yeah.
But that's, yeah, so that's back to your question additional. I think it's an important element
It
also
is very.
to help people reconnect to their own nature and to nature in a grander scheme of things.
Absolutely. Such integrity in what you say and do, JC. Mm.
Yeah, trying to do things from my heart and from what I believe, but with my trials and errors down the road, on the way.
Yeah, yeah, that's all part of it. It's all learning. Wonderful. Merci beaucoup. Really appreciate.
Oh, it's always a pleasure talking with you, panel, because you have beside being present, you have very insightful questions, which also help the other to reflect. And that's what I enjoy talking with you. It's also give me an opportunity to reflect on my own journey. So thank you.
You're welcome. Big, beautiful journey and lots ahead. Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Penelope. It was
Yeah.
a pleasure to
Mm,
exchange with you.
yeah. I'll just do a pause here. So we'll put a pause here and see you back for the next Earth Converse podcast. In the meantime, go out and enjoy Earth, one conversation at a time.